We're just going to go through different tactics, really, different scenarios and different ways of approach. This time of year, obviously, we've had the early months, February, March, where it's really big cold waters and your heavy lines and sink, get down at them. Now we're starting to, get the warmer climate, the warmer months, warmer water temperatures, and a bit more, obviously, fish are a bit more active and willing to move for them. So Con and I have got two different approaches, two different rivers. My main river is obviously the River Eden, but I do fish a lot up in the Highlands and the smaller rivers, the Spate rivers. So again, a completely different approach from what I'm fishing at home than what I am up in, say, the Helmsdale or up on the Findorn and things like that. But two different, obviously different rivers, different depths and things. So, and obviously Con fishing a lot on the Tay, different approach altogether, and some of the tributaries to the Tay. So,
we both base our approach throughout the season on principles that we've adopted for a long time: higher water, bigger rods, heavier lines, colder water, deeper in the water, slower flowing flies, and the range of tools we use for rods and lines, in particular, like any high-end sport. I view my fishing season like a golfer would a golf course. Throughout the water columns, I'm constantly refining my tactics, my line diameters, my line lengths and depths to suit the scenarios. I find in my occupation on the Tay that a lot of anglers turn up one-dimensional. They've got one rod, one full floating line, and probably a couple of poly tips. So I've always got a huge armoury at my disposal, which produces throughout the course of the year multiple more salmon than I would if I was one-dimensional. So the benefits of being multi-dimensional is you can always tailor your approach to the scenario that you face in the river, which is an ever-changing environment throughout the course of the year. So at this time of year, I'm coming at the back of very high water this spring. It's been very cold. I've been predominantly utilising my bigger rods, 14.9s, 9.10s and 10.11s. I fish a pair of rods on a daily basis, one with a sinking line and one with a multi-tip line. It gives me varying speeds that's approachable to different pools. So if you're in a thin water pool, you don't want to be using a very heavy line because it will catch in the bottom. So that's when I utilise my 4D compacts against my 3D compacts throughout the course of the day. And of course, I've got different styles of manipulation for every different scenario that I face on a daily basis in the river. So at this time, with the warmer temperatures, we're now looking to fish in the middle column of the river. It's more applicable to the shorter rods and lighter diameter lines, 9.10s, 8.9s and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, typically what my approach, and this is, I knew that would happen. So that, for the Eden now, that would be my go-to. So it's a 13.9, I've got a Scandi float belly on it, and then I've got a tip on the end, which I can change that. But generally now, that float belly won't change. I'll just modify the difference on the tip. So I can go from what's on that now is a hover intermediate. What I would generally do is I would stick to that once this water is dropping in now and the water temperature's probably sitting, I mean yesterday it was sitting at 44, so I mean you're getting warmer weathers now. Obviously as the day goes along, the water temperature will lift with the obviously the warmer days. We had close on frost last night, so it's going to start off pretty cold. So I would generally the approach would be I would go deeper in the early part of the day while the water temperature is down there, and I can do that by simply changing the tips. And you can put, whether you want to put a 12 foot, 15 foot, even 18 foot on it, depending on what obviously the approach of the water that you're fishing. Now, to give you an idea from that, this week and next week I'll be fishing a completely different river, and I'll be going on to a switch rod. That'll be the biggest rod I'll use next week. And that is a Spate River, similar water temperatures, but it's a totally different approach. You've got, what I'm expecting is to face like clear water, fish, a lot of it will be sight and fish and looking and searching them out. And it can go from a switch rod right down to that single hander. So I mean, you're talking obviously we're middle of April and we're using single-handed rods. So it's a completely different dynamic, a completely different approach. So, and I mean, but as I say, the Eden, a lot of, obviously, I recognise a lot of you lads, they're always fishing, you know.
What's your line rating on that switcher rod?
That is 6-7, yeah. And similar with the single-hander as well, it's a 7 weight. So I prefer a little bit more beef on the single-handers. So other people have, you know, obviously use a 6 weight, but I like a little bit, you know, stiffer rod. But as I say, that completely different scenarios, and it gives you, you know, an idea of where you can go. But if you're fortunate to fish, you know, different rivers, but if you're lads local to you, I mean, you go to nowadays, you know, that mid-range rods of anything from like 13, 14 foot, more than ample for a rod, you know, for a river of this size. And generally, as I say, what Con was referring to earlier, people have a one-dimensional approach, but you can vary that now with modern lines. It's so easy to do. You know, it's sometimes, you know, it can overcomplicate things because it does get a bit, you know, overpowering when you see all these different ranges to go at. But what I would say to that is have as many options as you can to face the environment that you're going to be fishing, because it can change so much. You can look at the weather, as we all do. If we've got our trip, you look in advance, you know, like weeks and weeks before of whether the rain's going to come or whether the rain ain't going to come. If you rock up and you've turned up with very limited ammunition, you could spoil your full week really. So for the sake of having, you know, multi-different approaches and multi-different lines that you can fish different depths of water and different speed of water, your success increases. So we can always resort to pulling a big Toby out the back and firing it on the fly rod. And but I mean, that's, you know, it's about getting as many, you know, as improving your chances as possible. So yeah, I think that's the rods for me. I think the style of fishing and the approach of fishing, and for me and Con, we have different approaches to it. I mean, everybody's got their own, you know, their own method and their own approach, but I think for me, as you fish for salmon, I've fished for salmon, you know, most of my life. I mean, almost 50 years, and you know, I've gone from the early days where a lot of us were just, you know, using the shrimp and the prawn and all that. But if you look at the different sizes of baits that we were using, and compare that to flies now, there's just no secret recipe, is there? They can surprise you. You can catch them on tiny things to things that are 6 inches long, but for me and Con, it's about the different ways of fishing the pool and approaching the pool. So, I mean, Con will explain, you know, the fly movement in particular and his approach.
Yeah, well, I'm at this time of year I'm identical to Paul in my theory of how I want to go about morning fishing. The water's always going to be colder, so I want to fish a lot deeper and a lot slower. I've got two different methods of controlling the line as it comes through the water, and in every cast scenario I'll implement both parameters of both of my body, right and left. Okay, so my first cast in a pool, in this pool, would be a left-handed single spey, but I would put a big mend in the line to get the fly down and chuck it again to get slack into the system. Unlike tailless, I would want a bit of slack to get my fly down to the correct depths. So my line and my fly are identical in the water. But then, other than mend continually to keep this fly slow, I'd manipulate the speed of the line with my hand. I'm in control of the line, especially with the sinking lines. This is when I'm fishing my sinking line first in the morning. I'm in absolute control of that line. I want that line to do nothing else than progress through that pool at the same speed of the water or slightly slower. Okay? And as it heats up, and you probably see fish coming into the pool, and you get a feeling, these fish are moving. And I want the fly progressing as slowly as it is. I would then switch to my compact tip system. And I would be still utilising my left-hand cast, but then manipulating the swing of the fly with my right hand. I would tone it towards the bank to increase the pace of the fly, so I could cover a bit more water and I could be more dynamic. Now I tailor that with the appearance of the fly. If I'm fishing slowly, I sometimes fish a sombre fly that will fit in and take the fish by surprise if they're lying through the course of the year. But at this time of the season, when you're pretty much looking for a moving target, it's almost guaranteed to be in the middle column of the river as it's coming through, or slightly higher if the water temperature's up. So I want my fly to have appearance. I want it when it's in that pool, that salmon's in no doubt there's something there it's got to investigate. Okay, so I'm choosing very bright flies, and since I've spoke to Jan Erik a couple of years ago in Norway, flash wing flies are flies with a lot of flash in them. On a bright day like this, it's the equivalent of a neon bulb coming through that pool. So when a fish comes up there that's come off the tide, that's brand new, covered in sea lice, it still has its feeding instinct in it. And most probably the last thing it ate was very shiny, which is why a lot of fish are caught spinning at this time of year and throughout the season. It resembles what they were last eating, so it's an instinct that's in them. So I like my fly at this time of year and throughout the year, unless I've got stale lionfish, to have presence. When it's in that pool, no matter what speed I'm fishing it at, that salmon's in no illusion, there's something there for it to investigate. Now, an instance that happened this week when I was fishing with Frederick before I came here, I was fishing in a pool rather slow. Again, right hand man that was coming round, and I got one jag like this, jag. And I didn't know it was a trout or a salmon. I thought, was that a trout or was it a salmon? With the brightly flashed flies, you do get a lot of inquisitive trout nipping at it, so it's hard to interpret what's went on. Honestly, I've probably walked away from that offer hundreds of times and never done anything about it. My instinct told me just to wait 5 minutes, sat down, had a wee look, nothing, no trout on the go, nothing. Says, right, I'll give it 3 more casts. First cast, introduced the fly, but I introduced it at a different kind of pace. I was toned towards the bank. I got the same nip and then a solid connection. But I would have probably walked away from that thinking it was a trout 9 times out of 10. But my instinct told me maybe it wasn't a trout. So I think in a lot of scenarios, no matter how you fish, it's always good to communicate with other anglers as well. Look, we're all fishermen. I'm only too willing to impart my knowledge because that's how we evolve as fishermen. But if you're trapped in the one-dimensional format, you're turning up with one line, one wee box of flies, 15-pound Maxima, you will catch fish, no doubt about it. But you will only catch the fish that are available to be caught on that. If you're thinking out the box, tailoring your approach, manipulating your fly at different speeds, and offering different menus at different varieties of depths and speeds, you're always going to have a higher return than if you turn up one-dimensional. So that's the benefit of having all this gear. You don't have to be like me and have
Tackle tart.
20 rods, 20 lines, 20 reels. No, you can have probably 4.
Yeah.
But I think it's key as you come to the river now at this time of year, and you'll go through the summer months, and it's an ever-changing set of parameters. The water's always getting lower or always getting higher. And having the correct kit to adapt to those scenarios will put more fish on your tally than anything else.
I think like most of us, particularly fly fishing, you know, you start off and you approach a pool. I think, you know, if you go on a beat or if you fish in association water, you tend to, a lot of people are just wanting to think that the further they cast, the more fish they're going to catch, and you see it so many times. It's chucking it across and standing waiting, just holding the rod and come round, and again and again. There could be 4 or 5 people fishing that pool in the same way. They've all got similar flies, different sizes, things like that. You go to any beat, the first thing you're asking a gilly, what did they catch, what are they catching the fish on, and everybody goes to that same fly. And that, nothing wrong with that, and there's reasons for, in my opinion, there's reasons for why certain flies do particularly well is because everybody's using them. It's not rocket science. But what I always do, I mean, I've, you know, like a lot of us here who are experienced, but every day and every year it's every day in particular is a school day, because you learn off each other, and it's all about sharing that knowledge. For me, what I've learned is, and certainly privileged enough to fish some of them Highland rivers where you actually see fish moving and they react and how they react to flies, in particular the movement of a fly. And I think since I've got that in my head and being able to do that, Other people have been fortunate enough to go and fish over in Iceland and things where it's very much about sight fishing, and you see how the fish react. But a lot of us were fishing away. You don't know. You might have gone through that pool, you could have had 5 fish show interest to your fly, and it hasn't done it. I would fish that pool, go through it in one way. I could swing it depending on the height and the speed of the water, but I would guarantee, even on the speed of the water, I want to move that fly in some shape or form, and whether that's jigging it, whether it's stripping it or what. I've had fish in really fast water where I've stripped that fly as fast as I can. And the difference of size, the difference of flies and everything can vary so much. And there's never ever a rhyme or reason to it. I've seen us go through pools where you're fishing really small and then you've had nothing and switch to something extraordinarily big and nail fish. But I think a good point, and to actually see the movements in the water of how different flies react. But I'll just two examples, 2 different approaches, and we all fish with them. Very, very effective fly, and that's the Francis. Particularly back end, but can be equally successful in the spring as well. Now you look at that, there's nothing in there that's going to give that fly movement. But you see a lot of flies now, they've got a lot of man-made fibres in there and just built to move, and obviously in different ways, different currents. But that for me, I could fish that several different ways. I could fish it almost like a check nymph, where you know, really slow, deep, let it sink. But I would always, mostly the times, I would always move that fly, whether it's a slight jig or whatever. Sometimes I'd just let it drift down, up again over the same bit. The next time I'd just give it a little slight movement and you get the reaction. Not always, sometimes you'll get it on the drift. But then you can go from that and the same to something, you probably look at us and think, you don't catch fish on that, but they're somewhere. Now that is a completely different approach. It's plastic. It's got a very, very small amount of hair on it and a little bit of angel hair twinkle. But for me, that is a different approach, but that is all about the movement. And that is higher up in the water. So the fish, for me, are not reacting to what's on that body, because there ain't no body. The fish are reacting to the movement of that fly. It's like we often say, I think, Con, you referred to when we're driving, if you're driving down the motorway, and salmon are no different, neither is your pup or your kitten. If there's a fly on the windscreen, it ain't moving, you don't touch it. See, when it's hovering about in front of you, your instinct just want to slap it, don't you? And that's no different whether you've got a pup in the house or a kitten in the house. If you've got something, a toy that's sitting there, they'll ignore it. You move that and start jigging it along, they react to it. And salmon are the same. I've seen it so many times in clear waters that you're fishing, and the reaction of a fish on fishing the Helmsdale or whatever, you've got the ability to see that because you're fishing a smaller window. But I've seen fish come at a fly 3 times and not even touch it, and you move it differently on the 4th time and it's swallowed it. And that's, I think, the most important thing for me is just having that in your locker of just everybody fishing a pool. 3 or 4 people could, be in front of you, do something different, and don't be scared. Don't be scared to try different things. I mean, if there's fish in the pool and there's a taken fish, it will react sometime. So.
Yeah, I think the key ingredients to what Paul's saying there is absolutely. I'm probably the biggest advocate of fly manipulation. Through different techniques and different scenarios, I'm constantly moving the fly. I very rarely let it come round itself. I do apply it, but my first and foremost is to always be manipulating the fly, because like Paul said, it's basic instinct of any creature, human being, pup, cat, fly, whatever. If there's movement, you'll react to it. It's just basic. It's just basic. So again, that goes on top of the one-dimensional. If you turn up with the one rod, one setup, one kind of fly that you've got faith in, doing the one thing, you'll only achieve a one-dimensional result. Yeah. You can open up Pandora's box with this. when we have the one-to-ones and after these things, I'm quite happy to go through what I do with everybody individually. And in the second one this afternoon, I'll show you more fly manipulation in the water with what the setups I've got. But I think it's thinking at the box, like Paul says, and creating a reaction right away is my first protocol. I'm always looking to manipulate the fly in something that will cause a reaction, other than just being stuck in one-dimensional cast swing.
Yeah, I mean, show you typically what I was just referring to there. When it's dry and it's in your hand, it looks nothing. You know, it's just a little bit of hair on
one
that.
guy's behind you, so.
But when I'm just going to flick it out. But when you see that in the water, look at that, and you see the movement of it. It goes from nothing to something that's going to be very attractive to them. But you see, you can swing it across. It's motionless. It's just doing, you know. You can catch fish on that. This is actually plastic. I'd fish it with either a full float. I'd fish it either on a full float, or if I want it just to break under the surface, I would put a short intermediate tip on it. But the thing for it is, look how that becomes attractive to fish when you're stripping it, you know, moving it quickly. Now, when you've got water, obviously with different, like a makeup of boulders and things like that, the fly is obviously always going to act differently. But for me, definitely with the movement of how you're fishing that fly, whether you're stripping it or just jigging it like that. But I think the flash wings really show up as an example of how that movement.
Well, a good thing is, and I will just jump in here on top of that, Paul, as well, is this is what I'm talking about, fly presence. Now, Paul's got a fly that's dark and fitting in with the environment, and it's the manipulation of the fly in amongst the environment that will cause reaction, because it's undetected by the fish till it sees the movement, because it's fitting in with the environment. Okay, and if you look at this one, which was, I'm saying, with a fly with presence, the minute this touches down, you could see it, right? You could see that fly all the way across the pool. Okay, so one cast, static. You're notifying the fish it's there. Another cast, like Paul says, and it's great. We can tailor our approaches to do this. If I was stripping it, look, it's got a total different movement through the water, okay? It's entirely different. If I'm shaking it, it'll wobble, look. See it? Right? That's what I catch most of my salmon on, that little dart movement. Because if you think when a salmon's an infant in this river, when it's in its primary in this river, it feeds, okay? And while it's feeding, when it's a youngster, it's ingraining an instinct to feed. So what we try and do is stimulate a reaction from that. It sees probably flies that size when it's an infant and it can't do anything about it. But very rarely, any food source that's coming into this river or off the riverbed is static. It's always wriggling. So, I'm famed for it, the jiggle. Look what it does to the fly. The fly is always jiggling, okay? Now, with my flash wings, when I'm fishing them really deep in the water, which I'll show you in the next part of the demo this afternoon, I like to hop them, okay? And I achieve that by doing this. Look, see that little tug? So the fly's always swinging at the same part of the pool, but that little tug with the flashing material makes the fly pulse. And if it's gathering light from this, like today, it could be seen for miles. I find the takes when I'm doing that, when I'm hopping the fly, are absolutely savage. Okay, so when that fly's hopping like that, in particular when the materials go back, they puff out. Yeah. So you get this puffing effect from the fly you're using. And I find the takes on that one to be really solid and aggressive. You're under no illusion you've got a fish on. So there's a lot. We'll go into the second part of this. Yeah. There's a lot of different degrees of fly approach, pool approach, techniques, and manipulation. So the fly manipulation. This is what I was talking about earlier. Look, I can control where that fly sits in that pool by that. A lot of people will mend and mend and mend and mend. But if you look what happens when you mend, look. You cause a little splash on the river, and with that, against that, could be seen, so that could spoil your opportunity. So I tend to very rarely mend unless I'm needing to get the fly down. Unless I'm needing to get the fly down, I'll manipulate, look. right? Let the fly straighten out, and I can manipulate that fly and hold it right where I want it to. And then I'm in control of the swing. I could let it just progress through the pool, like this. So, cold water, slow running fish, you want that fly to maximise its time out there. First thing in the morning, always our approach, both me and Paul. Later on in the afternoon, especially if you start seeing fish heading and tailing, I'm now wanting to increase my fly swing. Okay? Look at it, it's moving in a different direction and it's coming across that pool at an entirely different speed. But I'm maximising the duration of the pool. Because running fish are not, they'll be in certain parts of pools, yes. There's always a designated route at a certain height of water where a fish will travel through. But if you're dealing with groups of fish, which we'll encounter in the next couple of months, it's always beneficial if you could cover the whole pool. But or have your fly do the duration of its swing from point A to point B being the bank. So, a lot of key ingredients. They all add up to the same thing.
Yeah.
More fish. More fish.
If
If you're just casting and mending, your fly is coming through at the same pace as every other person's. It does catch fish, no doubt about it. But if you think out the box, adopt some new wee tactics, and it's about being brave. I didn't learn this for people, I just adopted these tactics as I went along. Some of them happened by mistake, but when you find something that works, bolt it on.
I think that's an important point. Certainly, what Con's referring to there in different line speeds and different approaches to it. But just by changing the angle of your rod and changing, to slow or speed up, but don't just stick to obviously one dimensional approach. Yeah. It's that the fish can react in so many different ways. And as I said earlier, you can go through a pool and fish one way or one size of fly and go through the same pool, the same fish are in there and they react totally different to something, smaller or bigger. And I mean, every fly, it's people, I think for me, fishermen are attracted to the fly itself rather than thinking about, well, it's the approach and it's how you fish that fly, because there's so many on the market. You go in a shop and they're there for a reason. It's to catch us. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you can, what I was kind of showing you earlier with that, and again, this time of year, you can go from that tiny little, basically tying on an insert to something, and that ain't big, but I would use that in the same pool. I'd go from that tiny little insert to something like that or even bigger, and there's never, I would be never afraid to just try a different thing. Fish are there. We can all get stuck in a kind of a routine and thinking, there's nothing there, but you've got to keep it. I think people who are more successful in that, you just blank that out and just always think to yourself like you're fishing over fish. I know it's getting increasingly difficult nowadays, but I think there is hope yet. You know what I mean? But if you see, the way how the fly's sizes differ and how many times where you've gone through the pool and just thinking there's nothing there and you've just tried something different, I would always do that. I think, particularly if you're fishing really busy waters, if I fish, being brought up on association water, and I fish a lot of private beats or up Scotland now, and privileged to do that. But at the same time, I would always look at what other people are fishing. If they've been through a pool before me, I wouldn't go through. I would make sure I would just completely different approach to it. Whether that be line depth or would size, fly size or the speed of the fly, I would be working that. And look, everybody catches fish if you just stick at it. But I think if you improve your chances by just thinking out of the box, definitely.
Yeah, so marrying in with what Paul's saying there about different approaches and different flies and different tactics, yeah. So psychologically, on any fishing day, this is probably one of my main key attributes. Every single cast I make, particularly at this time of year, you very rarely see fish in the first quarter of the season. as we're coming into further into spring now, you'll start to see them coming into the pools. There will be more frequent shores. A good example of that on Tuesday when I got that fish. We never saw a thing the whole day. But every cast I made, I imagined there was a fish following my fly. It's easy to fall into the trap or just casting and going, there's nothing here today. You've lost focus.
Yeah.
You've lost focus. You've probably paid a good price to be there. So go determined. Go determined. You might not see fish, but I could absolutely guarantee you, if you imagine, and every single cast you make, if you imagine there's a fish behind it, that fly, you'll keep your focus and you'll keep your enthusiasm. And if you get nothing, you will absolutely go home knowing you've done the maximum to get a fish. So you've merited, you've merited a reward in yourself, that you utilised yourself to the maximum of your ability. It's easy to go and fall into the trap, there's nothing here today, I'm going to get nothing. I'm tired of having a cast, it's not going very well. You go and sit down, right? And that one opportunity a day swims past you when you're sitting down. So applying yourself to the best of your ability, adopting yourself into trying different things and different approaches, and appearances and flies. I've always got a bright fly on one setup, okay, and a dark fly on the other setup. Because I'm using a lot of flash wing stuff, it's a dark but bright fly at the same time. I'll give you an example of that. That one you could see it had presence in the pool, okay? You could see it at all times. The minute it touches the water, you could see it. Now this one's the same, but we're utilising a total different setup of components in the wing material for this fly. It's black predominantly, but it can be seen instantly, and it's always visible when it hits the water, right? Through the shiny stuff that's in its wing. Can anybody see that glistening? Right, I'll bring it in here. I don't know if you can see it with the light, but this fly is one of these flash wings. Can anybody see that glistening? So it's black in appearance, but the green stuff that's in it, if I hop it, the materials will open and close. And it's like Jan Erik describes it as being like a discotheque, and it is. It's like a flashing light. So the benefits of being sombre but bright at the same time by utilising your material. But if it sits still, you're relying on the light to make the sparkle. But if you're manipulating it, it automatically gathers light because it's moving across the light diameter. So by manipulating the fly, you create that wee pulse. It opens and closes and it gathers light at the same time.
Yeah.
One of the techniques that I see people using a lot that can be improved, a lot of times I see people rocking the fly back and forward. They find that quite therapeutic. But I've seen a lot of fish, in particular this time of year, and the one that I got during the week is a good example of that. If it taps when you're doing this, you will not stop till you're here, because it's a bodily function. That could mean you've got a very poor hook hold. That movement with your arm, like that, could mean that you've moved the hook hold in the fish's mouth before it's turned on the fly. If you're doing it with your hand, same movement. So other than towing the fly back like this with your arm, you get a connection. As you start the movement, you'll keep going. It's just natural instinct, you'll keep going. You get rug tug tug and the fish is gone. I've seen it thousands of times. If you're doing the same movement with your hand, you get the same effect, right? Anything touches that, you immediately let go. It's got that 3-second gap, turns, you've got it hooked solid. But the benefit of doing it either manually to physically with your hand is you can then alter it. So instead of being the same thing, again, you open up Pandora's box. You can do multiple things. You could tweak it back. You could rock it back. You can zip it back. But if you're just doing that, you're doing a one-dimensional thing. So you can improve your hook holds.
I think yeah, that's whichever way, you know, about the fly movement is definitely, for me, is if you've got hold of that line and you're tweaking it or you're stripping it or whatever, you're focusing on every cast. How many times, and we've all done it, where you're fishing away and your fly's drifting round, and that one time your pal rings you, you go answer the phone and the friggin', you know what I mean? It happens to us all, or somebody's lighting a fag up and that. How many times you see it, that's the time when you get your take and you're not focusing. And I think for me, when you actually are changing changing tactics and changing different approaches, you know, for each cast even. You're always on it, you're always focusing, and I think that's how you improve certainly you know, the amount of fish that you actually hook. But
So just experiment. Experiment. Don't get trapped in one-dimensional formats that will only achieve a one-dimensional result. Just be brave enough to experiment. I was the only person manipulating my fly the other day. It's no coincidence for me that I was the only person that caught a fish. So try and think out the box. Key points are always utilise your skill set to the maximum of your ability on every fishing occasion. It'll give you more fish.
Do you fish mono or fluoro on the end?
Well, that's a good question. I think we've both got
Well, if you're fishing in Scotland, the gillies won't let you fish fluoro.
Yeah, well, I'm an advocate of fluorocarbon, okay, and I fish long leaders. I'll only fish a shorter leader than that, which is a two-phase tapered leader, okay, and that's 2 arms length, or just short of 2 arms length to give me good turnover. But I can then regulate the weight of that fly by adding and subtracting. It's tied with a swinging treble on a bit of plastic to give it a buttress against, and there's a tungsten bead. And I always tie the flies with 1 tungsten bead. But in different pools and different depths and different scenarios, if I'm fishing a shallow pool, I want 1 bead. Fishing a medium pool with fast water, I'll put another bead on. And I just make the beads with the plastic liners. I melt on, cut it and melt on again. And I can add and subtract the weight of that fly without going through the rigmarole, changing all the lines, changing the leader setup and that. So again, it's another set of parameters that we apply on a daily basis. Fluorocarbon for me, yes, I fish 100% fluorocarbon.
The gillies in Scotland, we don't like it.
Yeah. Again, that's the one-dimensional approach. That's what they know. That's what they know. So, if you go to fish on said beat, wherever it is, it's regardless, okay? And the gilly says to you, put Maxima on that and all the rest of it. You set up your Maxima rod. You do exactly what he wants. But you say, listen, look, I've got another rod. I want to try another setup. This is how I set it up. So once I've done that, I'll utilise this as well at the same time. Is that okay? Most instances, that'll be perfectly fine. I'm a great believer in never take someone's enthusiasm off them. Somebody says to me, what about this? Do you think this will work? And I'll just say, let's try. Let's ask the fish the question. Okay?
too right.
Because I can't answer for it. Too many times I've been fishing places and you'll ask somebody and they'll say, oh no, that'll never work. Really? And I've seen people fall into that trap. And that person will be adamant he's using that. He's the only person that's caught that fish that day because it was different from everything else. So, never lose your enthusiasm. Always apply it to the best of your ability. It's okay for somebody to say, nylon, that and that. But I've always got a secondary approach as well. Okay? Yeah. So nylon versus fluorocarbon. I'm 100% fluorocarbon. Unless I'm fishing really, really deeply and I'm using the line to take the fly down and I'm using a plastic fly. So again, another set of parameters. Most often than not, I'm using fluorocarbon on my sinking lines to get my fly down and use the ability of the material. But like Paul said, with the Francis and stuff like that, sometimes when you really need them down, I'll use nylon. Now, I can honestly tell you there's not much in it. There's not much in between fluorocarbon and nylon. The reason I use it is, I like to use long leaders, okay? I know it's refractive to water, so I'll always cut through water. Nylon's buoyant, okay? So I have to use shorter leaders to achieve the same things that I achieve with a longer leader.
Yeah.
Okay, so the shorter the leader you've got, the less movement your fly's got, free movement. You're restrictive. The shorter you go, you're more restrictive with the movement. So if you've got a long leader on, you're maximising the movement. Out there when the current's changing all different and there's all kinds of morphology going on.
I think that's an important point.
Your longer leader will work. Yeah. But they're all pliable to different scenarios. Again, it's getting away from the one-dimensional.
I use both, and nothing wrong with Maxima, but I wouldn't use Maxima on low, clear water. You know, I would switch to the fluorocarbon and a tapered, long tapered leaders. Total different approach, but there's nothing wrong with either.
Yeah,
I mean,
this particular gilly, nameless, but just insists on it.
Well.
It's got to be Maxima,
Well,
put fluoro on, it chops it off.
Yeah, I think one thing about that, it's you're paying to fish a beat. You're entitled to do what you want to do. You know what I mean? You listen to the advice, but if you don't want to upset him, put it on. When he goes, change it. So, but I think the different. I think what Con touched on there is, like using the likes of Maxima. When you've got a shorter, deeper water, and you've got a short leader, it doesn't really matter at all. I think, as I say, the different approaches when you come and, in really low summer waters where you want, you've got 12, 15 longer leaders, tapered leaders. You're not going to use Maxima for that. You taper it down, and you either buy, that they already made up, or you make them yourself. Start up at anything from a 20 down to 18, down to 15, down to 12, or whatever scenario you're fishing, really. So.
Yeah, so another time when I'll utilise Maxima or fluorocarbon against nylon is if I'm fishing with a single hander, in particular if I want to fish in a different direction. A lot of times when things go really sticky in the summertime, that's when I do my most fishing, when it's most difficult.
Yeah.
I think if you can crack the code of difficulty, you've accounted for everything else. So my wife gets demented in the summer months because I'm always obsessive about catching the uncatchable salmon. Okay? Because if you can master that art, crack the code of really low, tough conditions, you've accounted for everything else. Because that's the hardest fish.
Touching on that though, Con, again, and you see it so many times, for me, I go down if the weather can change so dramatically, it can. I mean, this time of year, that in the sky wouldn't bother me, this time of year. But that in the sky in June, July, I probably wouldn't fish, particularly if there's no wind. It's different if there's a wind, and how many times I've seen it where I won't touch a pool purely because there's no ripple on that pool. Because I know if I do go into that pool, I'm just going to disturb everything. They're going to know I'm there. As soon as the weather changes, or if you get a drift, a breeze coming in and putting that ripple on the water, it acts as really, really good cover. And that is when I would get into that pool. But you see it so many times, and you want to maximise your time on the river when you're away, but or even at home. For me, the biggest success that I ever have is you choosing your timings to go as well. Now it's not always, you're not always, got the ability to do that, but it would be certainly for the summer months for me. I wouldn't spend a full day fishing down the river. Definitely not. It would be at the times. It would be either early or it'd be late. But depending on the weather, but generally in the summer you've got so many times where it's bright sunshine and just a flat calm. A lot of the time you're probably wasting your time unless you can go into a really slow deep pool and get down at them if you want to do that, But I think it's just choosing your time, innit?
Yeah,
is a key in it as well.
The purple windows of light phase are always key when you're in the summer months. Wind can be a factor in putting a lot of people off fishing as well in the summer months. So if you've got a really windy day but you've got good overheads, nylon, going back to your question against fluorocarbon, my pool approach would be entirely different from what it would be if the wind is coming up this pool, okay, and this has not got much flow in it, even if it's got a bit of flow in it. So a lot of times in the summer month the pool it's got minimal flow, it's very sluggish, okay, but you've got a big group of salmon here and you've been covering them one dimensional, and the day you're allocated to go fishing, the wind's blowing that way and you're saying, oh no, the wind's blowing upstream. That's going to be difficult. I might not go today. If you've got a single-handed rod, okay, and the wind's going that way, everybody grew up with the knowledge of our predecessors and ancestors saying, and it's a forgotten technique. It goes back to what Paul was saying about flies and flies catching anglers and things being in fashion. Techniques as well, historical techniques, backing a pool up. So if the wind's going that way and you've got low water conditions, good overheads, right away I'm changing from fluorocarbon to nylon, and I'm fishing with a plastic tube like Paul's. But I'm not starting up there, I'm starting down there. And I'm purposely fishing upstream. and the nylon against the fluorocarbon, the nylon will be buoyant. So I want my fly to be up on top, and I'm pulling it hard over the wave. It's like stripping a sunray, you pull it hard over the wave. These flies, smaller flies, longer flies, but fishing in a total different dimension from fish have been lying, everybody's been covering them in the same flies. All of a sudden it's different, it's going upstream, it's going back downhill again. How many pools do you know where the people can spin as well as fly fish? And you'll see a lot of people getting success with flying condoms, and it's all uphill, it's all upstream, okay? Yeah. You could do the same thing with that. Put a sunray on, cast it upstream, put it under your arm, and pull it like a flying condom. Trust me, it doesn't matter how fast you do it, you will never manipulate a fly or anything faster than a salmon can swim. Sometimes the faster you go, the more beneficial it will be to you. So, yeah, tailoring your approach to the scenario that you face on a daily basis will give you better results than just turning up one-dimensional, having a cast, hoping for the best.
Any questions off anyone?
When you're making your leaders, what notches do you use to tie them? Different lengths?
Just free turn blood knot.
Yeah, so I use a surgeon's knot. Yeah, but I can honestly say that I use our tapered casts as well. They've been a revelation. So the Igor tapered cast fluorocarbon, 9 feet length, comes in a variety of densities, quite thick at the buttress end. So I use a little Davy knot to connect it to the sink tip of the line. But the turnover it gives you is guaranteed because it's tapered correctly, scientifically. The turnover at distance is phenomenal.
That's what the tapered leaders are.
You can fish really big targets, really heavy targets, got guaranteed turnover. Yeah. Yes, so they come standard, our ones come standard 9 feet length, Igor tips are 9 feet length. I tend to buy the ones that are down to 4X or whatever, the 25 pound at the business end. That means you can always attach. Sometimes I've got 2 attachment lengths. So if I'm fishing a tapered cast, I'm not wanting to use a full arm's length, I'll use a 3/4 arm's length like that. Okay, and I'll add on sediments like that. But it's got to be obviously a downgrade from what's at the business end. So if it's 25 pound at the end of the taper, I'm going to maybe 18 as a kick-off for to give me more length and more freedom of movement. So when I'm manipulating it, I've got absolute guaranteed movement of the fly. Pardon? Pardon? Yeah, double surgeon, yeah. Always wet it. Make sure you pull each target. So it's one of those knots. It's a small, neat knot. It's very easy. Everybody could tie it. But unless you've got it absolute cinched, it can come apart. But the surgeon knot, yep, landed thousands upon thousands of salmon yet. I've always fished with a taper cast, no matter if it's that length or that length. I'll always split it. Surgeon knots never ever let me down. Any other questions?
The speed, what you said about with the salmon drawing out.
Yep.
That's the same with trout.
Exact same. Yep. Exact same. Yep. Roly-poly for salmon's deadly.
Yeah.
Even in the spring. Because we've got at work, I've got this ginormous pool called the Lynn Pool. It's predominantly a spinner's paradise. We fish it with a fly. Again, I try and replicate what happens with a spinner with a fly rod. So we fish it with the short rods, even in big water. It's a small swirly pool, so you want your line to be short. The casts can vary, like clockwork. If you've got one bit of water to fish, always cover, randomly search every single bit. A springer or a running salmon could be anywhere. There's a designated route, but they'll be spread out, they'll be anywhere. So it's important you search every little bit. But yes, it's the exact same. Exact same. If you're roly-polying for a salmon, you get a connection. Just keep pulling. Keep pulling till it takes a line fizzing out your hand that way. It's the exact same. A lot of people say, oh, I'm roly-polying, what am I going to do? Oh my God, there's a fish on the end. Oh, it's gone. Just keep going, keep going. As it takes, keep going, it will get harder and then it starts to pull back. You've got it hooked solid. One hand there. Job's good.
Yeah, I think, most of the times when I'm fishing them scenarios, whether I'm stripping or roly-poly, the rod's tucked away.
Yeah.
But what it does give you, it gets that, how many times you see where people just lifting the rod too early and things like that. When you're in control of the line, you actually get more time, more success in hookups, because, there's different approaches. People think that the longer you give it and things like that, as soon as I feel that fish, it's a tug of war with it. I'm letting it take it, but I've got a grip of that line all the time. The last thing I would do is just let go of it. When I'm working it and stripping it. But
I haven't been doing it that long, so
do you know when to like do the figure of 8 with the trap? Because I'm doing sort of reservoiring with the Windermere club
Yeah.
against like with a buzzer or an nymph.
Mm.
How do you that with a buzzer, a black buzzer, say? Would you just leave it or figure of 8 it or? pull it
Probably the
back?
trout lads will tell you better, but you know. But I mean, I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. That there's you would try all different ways,
Right, yeah, that's what
and then that's you know then once you're starting to get the success, what you're doing right.
yeah,
But that can change throughout the day. You know,
true.
what you're trying earlier on in the day to later on in the day is two different things. So, but
Trying to imitate what it is like.
yeah, yeah. Anybody else?
I think I could add a wee bit to that as well. You were talking about figure eighting. Somebody asked a question about figure eighting.
Yeah.
Was it with buzzers? Yeah. So try a stop start and use what works. So figure eight, if it's not working, static, move it a wee bit. Can always do different things. This again, being one-dimensional against multi-dimensional. Try different things and latch on to what works. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'll stick with one for about 20 minutes and I'll change to another one. See if that'll go. Yeah.
Anybody else? Don, I've never known you be so quiet. All right. Cheers.
Good,
Thanks
good.
a lot.
Okay, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah.